Hi, thank you, Aura, for the introduction. Thanks anyway for inviting me. I'm really happy to present. It's like I could talk about an introduction to autism for weeks and weeks. So it is a very brief introduction to what autism is, what it might look like, and what we can do. So there's questions and answers afterwards, but if there's any questions that arise after the presentation, I'm free to answer them anytime. You have my email address there. So I'll just start. So what we're going to talk about today is just a very brief introduction to autism awareness, which will include different types of thinkers. So all our brains are different. So I want to talk a little bit around what it might feel like if you think differently to other people, to the majority of people. A little bit around masking, because it's quite common within the autistic community to mask your behavior to try and blend in. Sensory processing. So sensory processing is really important in different environments. And then I'm just going to talk about some challenges that students might face in a university, but we can also translate that to any environment. It could be a shopping centre, it could be school, it could be the workplace. And just a little bit around what DCU is doing to address these challenges, and then to kind of condense it into an example of an autism-friendly event. Just a little bit on language before I start, because language changes and it can be confusing. At the moment, the autistic community have expressed a preference for autistic person, people language. In other words, to say, I am autistic. So most adults are referring to themselves as autistic because they see it as a way of being. Some also say, I have autism or I am on the spectrum, but the majority would say autistic students, I'm autistic. Some terms that might cause offence, and again, we all learn language continually changes, is the word suffer, so suffer from autism. Asperger's syndrome is a mild form of autism. Well, research on the autistic community would say that you cannot break autism into mild, moderate, profound. It is all under one umbrella. And some people might have higher support needs, but that doesn't mean that they are in a category of mild, moderate, or severe. Normal developing children, adults, well, I think we all know that that just doesn't exist, the word normal. So what you would say is neurotypical. So if you are not on the autistic spectrum, you are neurotypical. And also the word disorder. Autism isn't a disorder, it's a different way of thinking, learning, processing. So what is autism? It's pervasive. So in other words, it affects how you think, how you learn, how you communicate, and also your sensory system. So by sensory system, I mean all the senses: touch, sight, smell, movement, sound. All of your senses are impacted. Neurological. So research does say that the structure of the brain might be a little bit different, the way the pathways are formed. Some are very connected, others are. So Safi Simone, she is an artist, a really talented artist on the autistic spectrum. What Safi says is, sensory-wise, my experience of the world is far more intense, deeper, brighter, louder, and detailed. So in other words, that leads us to believe that Safi's sensory system is very, very sensitive. So sound, colors, touch comes to her very, very strongly. So she would really feel touch and sound much louder and more intense than a neurotypical person. Frank Ludwig, he is an Irish writer. He's diagnosed as autism as well. And what he says is autism is not only a natural but indispensable part of human neurological diversity. If it weren't for autistics, human evolution would be unthinkable. Therefore, autism should not merely be accepted, it should be appreciated. And you do see these days that more presentations and conferences are labelled autism appreciation or autism acceptance, not autism awareness, because it begins with awareness, but the next level is accepting something and appreciating it. So just a little bit on the ways different brains process. So we have what we call literal thinkers. A literal thinker will struggle with slang, with metaphorical grey language. So for example, here, I will zip off to the shop. The other person is literally processing a picture in their mind of this person undoing their zip. Because what you say to me, I take that on board. I don't have the filter to decipher it. It's a literal way of thinking. So it really makes us think about how we speak. Like, is it clear? Is it concise? The advantages to being a literal thinker are you're very, very strong at dealing with concrete information, visualizing information. So like coding, all of that, scanning through and coming up with a really detailed picture. Also, it can be, they say it's very good to be a literal thinker in times of chaos, because you're seeing things exactly as they are. You're not seeing all the gray area. So it can help you make a really quick, clear decision when it's needed. And this is just some expressions that I would have come across. I've worked like in the area of autism for 20 years from 2-year-olds to like 65-year-olds. So for example, look up and down, you know, when we were crossing the street. So the boy literally looked up and down to the sky, to the ground. Traffic lights, when I would say stop, wait, go, this is going to be the process. Halfway across the street, the little boy would stop, because I instructed him. I said, stop, wait, go. So he stopped, he waited, and then he went. In school, don't run in the corridor. So that's great to say don't run, but what do you do if you don't run? So do not run. So what do? Do I jump? Do I skip? Do I hop instead? And I remember at the doctor sometime, the doctor saying to a little girl I was with, give me your hand. And the girl literally thought it was, she had to remove her hand to give to the doctor. Now I've included these, they are extreme examples and there were younger children, but just as an example of literal thinking. The other style of thinking is single, very, very single focus. So we talked about black and white. So it's this or it's this. There's not really room for grey. And a single focused thinker will very much be on one track. And if you try and pull that person off that track very quickly, their thoughts and emotions become derailed. So they're removed from this. So it could be somebody watching something and you suddenly move them and show them something else. That can be quite upsetting. Multitasking is difficult because I'm doing this, I'm really intensely focused on this, and now you're asking me to also do that and listen and touch and feel. Very, very overwhelming. It might be hard to see the bigger picture because I'm very detail orientated. The advantages are, and there's lots of advantages, really detailed concentration. This person is going to get the job done, beginning, middle, end, and it'll be quite perfect. Really can spot the minor details. And as I say, a finisher gets the job all the way done in like really good standard of work as well. The opposite to that is somebody multi-focused, so being able to do lots of different things at the same time. So for example, sitting on reception, but also able to type, also able to keep an eye on the time, talk to somebody. The challenges there could be staying focused, so the opposite, so finding it difficult to stay on track. Get sidetracked really easily. So you might see, I'd see a lot of students who are like multi-focused thinkers, but it's not an advantage in some ways to them. They're constantly fidgeting, trying to stay grounded, and it can be very hard for them to concentrate on one thing, particularly these days on Zoom online. You know, they're listening to Zoom, but they're putting their phone on, they've got 3 or 4 windows open on the internet, so continually switching. And it can be hard, therefore, to see the overall bigger picture or the small picture. They'll see the overall. So we have single focus and we have multi-focus. So how might this look in a group? So first of all, somebody who is very, very single focused might talk in detail about something they're interested in. And that might look like they are monopolizing the conversation. They might have difficulty switching from a different topic to a task. So this could be a team meeting. Perfectionists, good enough is not good enough. So it might come across as very, maybe, who is this person with their super high standards? But it's not that, it is just perfectionism, and it is quite common in the autistic community. Like just not happy with mistakes. Like structure and order, and don't cope well with a change and plan. So obviously the last 2 years have been of monumental destruction to a lot of autistic people because of transitioning. So it was already difficult enough, but they had their structure go in, like going to work, going to college. That all changed, and now they're being asked to transition out of this, out of lockdown, back into the workplace or university. And not only that, but now the university or workplace has new rules to do with social distancing. So there's a lot of anxiety at the moment with staff and students I'm talking to about this new plan of, first of all, returning, so coming out of this structure and possibly safe place they've created and returning to something new again. So structure and order are really important because there's lots of confusing things going on. So structure can be the holy grail. Using and interpreting facial and body language differently. So the person just literally may not be able to interpret what looks like joy or sadness in a face. They will certainly feel it and probably feel it more than a neurotypical person, but it is a bit of a struggle to really work out what that face signal is saying. Also, different levels of personal space. So all of these things can make group situations difficult. And something else that I never really thought about in detail, a lot of autistic staff where I work are saying to me that they're finding networking, like they may be coming out with higher workloads sometimes because it's just that little added extra of when you leave a meeting, you know kind of who to talk to, some shortcuts to take, who has that information. So it is very much about being socially aware and confident when you leave the meeting or before the meeting to find out who I should be talking to. They're not doing that a lot of the time. And they're calling it, I suppose, sourcing additional information. So really information sourcing. So communication styles. So I think this is important. Some autistic people will need a little bit more time to process what you have said. And it is sometimes around 30 seconds. So if you keep repeating the question, the person is going back to the beginning to process what you have said. So it is just a slower processing system into dual language. Younger children might get teased or bullied a lot because possibly their vocabulary is quite advanced for their age. Other autistic students have said to me that they have, I won't say the word bullied, but they have felt bad because of their tone of voice. They've said that their tone is quite flat all the time. And even when they're relaying, if somebody says something sad to them, the reaction might be very much like, I'm sorry to hear that. And they feel very bad afterwards because the person might have said, well, you don't sound like you're sorry. But it literally is, it's a monotone voice. Turn-taking conversation can be hard to figure out. So they might jump in and again, they feel bad afterwards. So it's all kind of things that like other people might have a gut feeling what to do. It may not be as profound in an autistic person, that gut feeling in social situations. So just one or two things not to assume. So there are a lot of autistic people who don't use language at all. So don't assume that that person doesn't know exactly what you are saying. Highly likely they do, generally they do, but just because they don't use language, don't assume that they don't understand what your language. Don't assume that someone is not autistic because they can make eye contact and talk about the weather. They may do that, and then they may take 2 hours at home afterwards to have to decompress from that because of the effort it took. Don't assume that a fluently talking autistic person is capable of processing what you have said like rather quickly. So they might be a lecturer, they might be academic, but don't assume, and they might also be autistic, don't assume that the way you speak to them is going to be processed straight away. It possibly isn't. And these are really important things that autistic people have told me that they have to think about. That neurotypical people, we spoke about the gut feeling, that you just don't need to think about. So how close should I stand? How loud should my voice be? How long will I look in this person's eyes? What's the proper facial expression for this conversation? Should I talk fast, slow? Where do I put the emphasis? Office politics can be a minefield of information for anyone, but for an autistic person who thinks very literally, they're impossible to work out. And possibly the autistic person might overshare, so boundaries. Interacting can be exhausting, so the autistic person or student needs time alone to recharge. Pressure to socialize isn't helpful all the time. A lot of autistic students will say to me that their downtime is reading books. So it is again about getting the balance. This is what one student said: I don't automatically understand social interactions. I have to study them, analyze them and imitate them, so pretend. It does not come to me naturally. And this is a danger. This is what is very exhausting. Imagine if you are doing this all day, copying someone's behavior and just being really conscious of trying to copy it. That is called masking. And this is masking. You're trying to fit in. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about this student, Mel. So we have COVID masking and then we have autistic masking. So Mel has said that from the beginning of school, socially her otherness was clear. She spoke nothing of her as obscure interests, deliberately watered down my vocabulary so as not to sound autistic, focused hard on maintaining eye contact without staring, but all of this was ignored and ridiculed daily. And through her 2 years in a particular school, she ate her lunch in the toilet every day and hid in the wardrobes. This was missed. Why was it missed? Because she was an A student, academically achieving A's all the time. But I guess what that A didn't portray was the effect that being ignored and just being very subtly ignored all the way through school, the effect that had on her mental health. So I've included her blog there. It's really interesting. A little bit on sensory processing. So we have hyper and under. So hyper is where the person is really struggling with all the senses in the environment: light, noise, sound, touch, close proximity. Undersensitive means the person is finding it hard to regulate themselves. So they might be constantly fidgeting, they might need to sit on peanut balls, continually moving around, because they're finding it hard to ground themselves. I'm going to play just 2 minutes of this video. It is quite loud. I thought that this video was quite exaggerated, but autistic students have said to me that yes, sometimes they would feel this in a lecture hall or in any environment where there's a lot of noise. So I'm just going to play a little bit of it.
Hey girl, why don't you pull over?
So that is just, I suppose, to show like the tapping of a pen, a light coming through a window, how exaggerated that might be for somebody on the autistic spectrum and how exhausting it is in a lecture hall to get through that. A very little bit about, and the video link is there, but really it just shows all the different sounds coming in one wall of sound. So the tapping of the pencil is coming in as loud as the lecturer's voice. Somebody chewing gum is also coming in at the same time. So it's coming in one wall of information and the person is trying to learn or talk to somebody at the same time. So very briefly, and I know I've only a few minutes to go, I'm just going to show you now some solutions that DCU, Autism Friendly University Project, is doing. So it's based on research, the project. So it's 8 principles. That video explains the principles in a very accessible way. So the main issues for students starting, but this can be related to anything. It can be related to starting a job or settling in. Stigma. Stigma is related to lack of awareness, and sensory, which we spoke about. So some things that DCU has done, and this webpage is available to anyone, is there is a webpage made by autistic students for autistic students in everything in relation to a new place. What a lecture might feel like, what social life might feel like, where to go for quiet spaces. So we have the web page. Students also fill in a sensory profile in advance. Creating awareness is really, really important. So we roll out autism awareness throughout campus every semester. We also work with students, which is really important. And we slightly tweak the autism awareness there. We call it more exploring different types of brains. So we talk about what it might feel like to be a single focused thinker in a group. And we also have had a lot of media coverage, which is very positive. It highlights the university and neurodiversity in a positive way. Also, we've adapted the sensory environment, and these are things you might think about yourself. When providing important information or answering questions, try to complete in a quiet and calm environment. Not always possible, but just to be aware of background noise now. Clear and uncluttered is best. Be aware of sensory overload. The person may need time out after a lecture, after a meeting. Do the lights need to be on? Give advance notice in a presentation if you're about to play a video. That can be a really big shock to somebody who is very hypersensitive, because 1 minute the presenter is talking, next minute there's a video with all this sound coming on. And we also have some drink and free food rows in all our, all our conferences, because smell can be very overpowering. So what would this is the last, what would a sensory environment, what would an event look like? Well, you would send out a statement in advance to say it's sensory friendly. You would designate a quiet zone. That literally can just be a room. You don't need anything fancy in it. There's no cost, just a room to sit with a quiet space sign on it. Let people know where it is. The lighting will be turned off in that room. Signage to find places in your event or in your library or anywhere, really, really important. You can also send out a little information sheet in advance, just knowing what to expect. And also for events that we run in DCU, refreshers, balls and things like that, big events, are there other options? So for example, for refreshers day and students day, we would have quiet times. So between 1 and 3, there's no loud music or no announcements made. So that's an example, very simple, quiet space. We also have the pods we use in the library. We have escape hatches, they're soundproofed. We are developing an indoor navigation app, because transitioning from one place of campus to another can cause massive stress. So this app will be like Google Maps, but it will bring you indoors and it will bring you the quietest route. We have also just released, and I have the link there for you all, a guide for builders and planning going forward. So any building going forward, people can look at these guidelines, and there's a checklist of what would make it more sensory friendly. They were designed by Magda Mossafat and DCU Autistic Community, and Magda's special area of interest, I suppose, is autism and sensory friendly design. I won't go through this, but it's just like a summary of what is seen as the norm. So being a people person, engaging in small talk, being chatty, being seen to be busy, that seemed to be the norm in a workplace. But outside of the norm, we have people who struggle with eye contact, are very direct, not able to socialize after work because it's all just been too much, avoid small talk, prefer to spend time alone.